demographics, Hispanic student issues. And the first thing I'd like to talk about is that title itself, the word Hispanic, which is actually an odd word. It's an invented word. And people don't really consider themselves Hispanic. Most people, they sort of like to be what they are, and that is, next, number 2. Yeah, what do people call themselves? Do we have people in here that, oh, you want, I like to walk around. You got me? Okay, I can't walk around. I'm being taped. What do you all like to call yourselves? Would you give your name and where you work and how you like to refer to yourself?
My name is Zabby Gonzalez, and I'm the principal at Caldwell Elementary. This is my 10th year in education. And being that I was actually born in Mexico, I was 10 years old when I came to the United States. So a lot of these stories that we're going to share today, actually I was part of them because I was one of those students that came at a later age, I guess you could say. So I actually call myself Mexican because I was born in Mexico.
Good evening, my name is Diana Madrigal Hopes, and I am currently a project-based consultant for Region 10. I'm also, Safi, I'm also a native of Mexico, and my parents immigrated to the United States when I was 5 years old. And I resided in the border area of Laredo, Texas, and Nuevo Laredo, Mexico, Tamaulipas. And so biculturally, I was raised with my grandparents living in Mexico, in Tamaulipas, and of course my parents in the United States. And so that those experiences of living in a bicultural, in a bilingual environment have really given me those skills to work with our communities here. And so I'm Mexican American now that I am a U.S. citizen, of course. Mexican American is what when I'm asked, so what do you consider yourself? Mexican, Mexican American, Chicano, and so I always say Mexican American. I feel that's what I am.
Yes. Dr. Reina Sotelo, I'm a principal for Dallas ISD Elementary School, Felix G. Boteo Elementary. And listening to you two, I'm third generation. My great-grandfather was from Mexico, and he came over here. And you know, I had my grandmother and my father here. And so listening to everyone, some of them say I'm Mexican, or I'm Mexican American because I was here and now I'm there. I always considered myself Latina. When I heard Hispanic, I knew where it came from, and there's no Hispania, so I didn't really want to. But then in my house, I'm not Mexican because I wasn't born in Mexico, and Mexican American again. I have vacationed in Mexico, so yes, my great grandfather's from Mexico, but I consider myself Latina, and I take great pride in the Mexican culture.
Awesome. And so, if you look around, I don't know if we have people from other cultural groups, either Latino or other cultural group who feel pride in what they are. If you wanted to just chime in and say, soy puertorriqueño, soy dominicano, soy colombiano.
I'm Vietnamese.
Yeah. Are you 100% or?
I'm part because of me is French. My great grandfather is French.
I think we're all kind of mixed, and that's what kind of makes us American. that wonderful mix. But we love to say where we came from, or something about our grandparents, or something about where we're going. And many of us are mixed heritage, and it's lovely and beautiful. And so the word Hispanic, it doesn't really tell you much. It's kind of a word that is empty, you know. So I wanted to kind of bring up more than just what we are ethnicity-wise, but to consider some of these issues. For example, civil status, whether lately it's become more important, whether someone has issues related to their residency. We have a lot of issues at university, for example, with kids really being afraid to come forward and even apply for that 2-year dispensation of trying to get, quote, legalized. So we have many students who are dreamers who were brought here as babies, and it's kind of difficult to help students. I know at the university we have that issue. I was saying in 1980, back then, US versus Texas, our young children couldn't even go to school until the state of Texas was sued by the federal government to allow students to go to school. And these issues have not been solved yet. So I raised this citizenship issue, residency issue, mostly because a teacher needs to be an advocate. You know, you will love your students when you get to know your kids and you really understand the plight of some of our kids. You become an advocate. So I would like to just turn to my panel and ask you how you feel about being an advocate. Are you an advocate, or do you just worry about their scores on the math test?
I have actually a funny story to tell you, to share before we break out. My school in Garland, it has a high population of Hispanic. We're 80% Hispanic. And my parents come to lunch every day, breakfast, lunch, and we open it. We don't limit on when they can come. So you have the parents that go, at least 20 to 30 parents each day. And one day we had a meeting and my principal and I were out, and we came to school and that school was empty. But we also noticed there was a van out there, a police van out there. And we're like, okay, what happened? Immigration. We're thinking, what's going on? But that was the only day at our school that no parents showed up, because it's a neighborhood where they're walking. And actually we thought a student had a gun, so while we're out, they called, the police came, the parents didn't know. So that gave us an idea. We were wondering why. Well, because most of our parents aren't legal residents.
Mm-hmm.
So as soon as they saw that van, they turned back around, and they did not. And that was the only day that we had 0 parents show up for lunch, because they didn't want to take a chance. So then as teachers and educators, we have to think, these parents, and I know we want them to focus on education, and I know we want them to focus on, you have to get good grades and you have college, but our parents really have other things to worry about. How are they going to provide for their kids the jobs they have? Close to my school, there's a center, the labor, where they're standing every day. They don't know where they're going to work each day. So even when we're asking for the planners, for the supplies, for the uniforms, a lot of these parents don't have the means. So as educators, we do have to be advocates for those parents and give them information, give them resources. This is where you can go for supplies, or even just say, don't worry about it, because is really a supply box really that important to our students? And we really have to teach our educators to say, look, it's okay. They have other things to worry about. So we're going to take care of them. And again, just become advocate for those parents and those kids, and work with each other, the teachers, and say, it's not a big deal. We have to, there's other things they're worried about.
Did you want to comment?
Oh yeah, I was just going to comment with Zabdi. We have, as principals, we find ourselves facilitating a lot more than what happens on our campus. And when it comes to residency status and even going on to college, and a lot of parents want their kids to go to college, but they don't know how, because they're not residents. And if they're scared to go to lunch one day because they see a white van out front of school, I can't imagine as a parent if they're going to fill out applications for their child or fill out applications with their child. They don't like filling out background check information. So it's very much so that we give them the information that they need. When I was speaking with a radio DJ one day, and he was bringing that awareness to me, because he went to college and he struggled with that when it came to residency. And I told him about a fraternity at University of North Texas, and they were trying to recruit other students, Hispanic students, and they ran into that problem as well. So they joined forces to bring out an awareness. So that's something that I typically try to tell my parents is, the doors aren't closed because you're not a resident. Yes, it makes it a little more difficult, but there are resources out there, and I try to give them the information that they need so that they know which doors to go through.
Okay, well, we'll go back to that one, and hopefully other people will. Dr. Brown? We were babies together. Now we're all grown up. I love it. So one other thing I'd like to bring out, as we're talking about the diversity of the whole population. The issue of naming and surnames and naming conventions in Latino cultures. I wanted to point out that when I was at a school in New York, I'm from New York. Did you notice my accent? Although I've been in Texas a long time. It was interesting because the non-Latino teachers would say, wow, none of these parents are married, none of these women are married. They all have different names from the names of the children. So the mother might be Maria Rodriguez, and her son might have a different name, Jose Hernandez. The thing is, many women, most, don't change their last name when they get married. They keep the maiden name. They're always going to be known by the maiden name. They just don't change it. In this country, you get married, you either hyphenate like I did, or you change your name. How many of you got married and changed your name when you got married? A lot of you did that. How many of you hyphenated? I got some of those too. How many of you didn't do anything? I got a lot of those. So, and then the issue is with the names. So you have a child who's like Jose Gonzalez Bartolome. So you think his last name is Bartolome, but that's not really in America the last name. The last name is the one before that. Gonzalez is the father's last name, comes before the mother's last name in the Latino culture. So it gets very confusing depending on, how recently they're arrived and how many names they're going to be using. Do you have a naming issue?
Yes.
Can you talk about it a little bit?
One of the things we do, again, because our school has a high population of Hispanic students, they do want to keep all the names. So even when you're looking them up in the system, you're like, what is that? Because it cuts it off. There's only so many letters they can have. So again, they take pride in that. And that's one thing that we have to realize, that it's really not because they want to, the moms want to be, that's their child. So it's a pride thing. So we have to value that, and we have to take that into consideration when we're working in the schools with our kids, that those are their babies, and they take pride in that. They're working together as a family. So we just have to, again, bring awareness to our teachers and say, look, this is
Another thing about names, I don't know if you noticed this, and we didn't talk about it, is the issue of nicknames. Nicknames are really big among Latino people. Oh my gosh, I remember when being a teacher and all, and I sometimes always couldn't even remember the kid's real name because we had all these funny names for people. And there was one little kid, and we kept calling this kid the parrot, Perico, because the kid was always talking. And another one, we called him the mono, because he just never sat down. He was just like running and jumping, and it was crazy. So nicknames is very popular, this issue of naming and nicknames, last names, first names. Do you have kids who have nicknames in school?
Yes, yes. And we have a lot of kids with nicknames. In addition to, what I've noticed is sometimes there's a teacher or an educator that's not able to pronounce the child's last name. So rather than struggle or try to eventually learn it, they'll just cut it off and say, oh, that's Jose S. And so when we talk about the pride, how prideful is that where an educator won't even take the time to learn how to say this child's name correctly, so we're just going to cut it off and say an S. And where a lot of times the educator, wants to take offense to that, saying, well, no, I'm not disrespecting the child. But again, the educator needs to understand, well, I didn't, I know how to say Johnson, or I know how to say your last name. I don't just say Miss J. So again, it comes down to pride, because you see how prideful we are with our names, and yes, our nicknames, but the educator needs to take the time to learn how to say the name, because we have pride in our names.
Exactly. Thank you. I'd like to move to another topic of diversity within the group, and that is the having to do with language. Language is a very big issue among Latinos, Mexicanos, otros Dominicanos, otros. Attitude and some of the consequences of language. Just to go to the next slide. Here we are.